Welcome back to the CoachIQ Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Kirsch, and we are here today with Jordan Hamilton, PhD of Positive Psychology. I joke, PhD of Play, a great friend of mine, someone I met while I was in undergrad, and I cannot begin to express how excited I am to have him on the podcast. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you, Mitchell. Happy to be here.
So I'll start off by letting everybody know that I've never beat Jordan in one-on-one. And now that we've got that out there, I feel a lot better entering this podcast. But I met Jordan at a time in my own playing career where, you know, I was trying to achieve certain goals that I had, but I didn't really have a way of thinking about that. And it aligned with the time where he was getting his PhD. We're at the same town, same school system. And Jordan's been an integral part of my journey as a player and as a coach. And his particular areas of expertise, I think, are underutilized in today's world. And I would love for you, Jordan, to explain, what does a PhD of positive psychology mean?
That's a great question. You know, I want to make one note on the one-on-one. There's a reason why we haven't played in a few years. You know, I'd prefer to keep my record intact. And I'm sure it would be a lot different where we'd play tomorrow, lace them up tomorrow. Yeah, you know, PhD in positive psychology in general as a field looks at how systems, individuals, and teams thrive. So traditional psychology is looking for dysfunction in systems and individuals. Positive psychology emerged from the 80s, where two psychologists, Martin Seligman, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the author of Flow, got together. Legend has it was on a beach in Hawaii, and they're looking at it and they're like, wow, the world's pretty good. Why don't we study that? And so that's where the specific discipline of positive psychology emerged. In my own, you know, process in that field, I came from basketball, playing, growing up, playing in Seattle, going to Lehigh University, having success there, really in the team sense, and then playing overseas for a couple of years, and really was fascinated with peak performance. So that's what I became interested in, specifically flow and group flow. And positive psychology offered a container, a field where that could be explored. So I was like, let's do that. Let's see how we can measure and create conditions that allow people to experience that more, which I've learned is a lot harder to do than I thought it would be. But that's what inspired me to enter into that field.
Very cool. And you talk about the conditions of flow, or maybe the prerequisites, whatever the term is. Could you first give it a definition of flow for everybody, and then also talk about what are those commonalities or those prerequisites of flow?
Yeah. Flow's, you know, one of the challenges in measuring it and developing the theory is it's slippery, because in order to be in flow, or when you're in flow, you don't know you're in flow until you're out of it. So one of the conditions of being in flow, the state of flow itself, is you lose a sense of self-consciousness. So you are so present in the moment that you no longer are really thinking much at all. And there's some debate here where your prefrontal cortex either is highly active, and I think it is in a sense, but the inner dialogue dies away. In general, flow is an optimal state of performance, characterized by in the moment awareness, loss of sense of time, loss of self-consciousness, complete focus on the task at hand. So these are some of the experiences that happen when one is in a state of flow. And then I think what flow, in terms of the prerequisites, and this is useful in the context of basketball, developing, whether that be individual lesson plans or even at the team level, is this nice graph that has challenge on one side and skill on the bottom. So challenge on the y-axis and then skill on the x-axis. had to go back there. And the idea is you want to ideally have the challenge be slightly above the skill. So, if I can make 5 out of 10 3-pointers from the top of the key, creating some sort of incentive or drill that pushes me to make 6. That's a very simple example. It gets a little more nuanced in a team context, but the idea is if the challenge is too high relative to the skill level, then individuals likely experience anxiety, which will lead to disengagement. If the challenge is too low in relation to the skill, they'll be bored. You see that with older kids having to do like simple dribble drills, right? Or things of that nature. So I think that in terms of looking at conditions or ways to structure activities that could produce flow, that's a really tangible, useful framework to start with.
Yeah, could you give us an example of that? Let's stick with the basketball context, and maybe we could do 2 examples. One, you're in the gym by yourself. How do you create that sense of flow? Or maybe you could play it as, you have an individual session. So one player, one trainer. What are ways in which we could help that player find flow? And then also from the team context, what would an activity look like?
Yeah. So I think with the individual, and Mitchell, this is something, you've really opened my eyes to with constraints-based learning, is infusing that element. It really pairs well with flow in the sense of, I think when you add in constraints and factors that give the individual, really a lot of different dynamic opportunities to engage their skills, right? And novel challenges that are engaging in their own nature, then I think it reduces, it more easily leads to those states where there's loss of self-consciousness because you're so engaged at the task at hand because, I've never shot off my right foot, from my hip or whatever it is, whatever you be doing, but it's great because it really does. I think it directs that attention on the task at hand in such a way that allows for some of those qualities of the state to emerge. So for the individual, for example, instead of something, I would say stacking on infusing constraints in standard mini games, right? So instead of, like we talked about earlier, making 6 out of 10 from the top of the key, maybe it's 3 out of 10, one dribble off the right foot, and something that has that challenges their skill in a new way and forces their system to find solutions. And I just think the more dynamic qualities you can add, the more they are forced to problem solve, the less opportunity they have to think in between reps. So the more likely they are to be able to feel a sense of flow. So I think shooting off different feet, shooting from different angles. I think working on different footworks on the catch. These are all specific ways in which you can find challenges that aren't just make or miss, right? Because
Right.
I'm sure or if you haven't, you'll talk at some point about outcome, like process focused versus outcome focused orientation. And so the more you could focus on the process and have the challenge be related to the process itself as opposed to the outcome, I think that's another way to engage and experience flow. So maybe you're more focused on the rep itself, and the makes become secondary, or just a way of tracking.
Absolutely. That's actually become a little bit of an inside joke in the workouts with Duncan and George, 2 guys obviously playing at super high levels, Duncan with the Pistons, George with the Jazz. And I think it's something that their coaches or maybe team psychologists have talked to them about. And they're so competitive naturally. And in all of our workouts, everything has a score, right? We're counting everything. Maybe it is like the way you score is like you have to make the shot in a certain way. Like you have to make the shot by making a Brad, or it has to hit the front rim first, just getting really particular with their skills within the skill. But sometimes they'll get caught up in that end result. and they'll lose the focus. And so they've had to sometimes remind themselves of it's all about the process, not the result. And oftentimes those reminders are during times where they're down in the workout, and they've had a lot of success building back up and actually winning those days when they shift focus from over obsessing or over judging that result, and then just bringing their awareness back to the present.
Hey, I just want to take a quick break. My name is Russell. I'm one of the founders of CoachIQ. We put on this podcast here. Our goal is to interview top coaches and business owners in the youth sports space across the United States and give you guys insight on the ground floor. How are they running their business? What do they think about the current ecosystem? And what are their thoughts on where things are going? So we're super excited to bring this to you guys. If you don't know about us, we are an all-in-one sports management platform. We run a lot of the businesses that we have on the podcast. And we're fortunate enough now to work with about 1,000 sports coaches across the United States. And it's our goal to make your life as easy as possible in running the business itself. Website, scheduling, payment management, everything handled seamlessly on our platform. And really what separates us is we are built specifically for sports. We're not powering nail salons. We're not powering Pilates studios. Every second of the day, we focus on you. So if that's something you need where you're looking to get your time back or you're looking to actually grow your business, CoachIQ is really the only platform thinking about you every single day, interviewing and working with the top coaches in the industry specific to sports. So if that's something we can help you with, we would love to connect with you. You can visit our website at coachiq.com, schedule a free demo there. The demos are awesome. It's really less about selling and much more about just walking through what we've learned and providing value on what other coaches are doing. And if it's a match, it's a match. So absolute no-brainer. Go schedule a demo, totally worth the time. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for customers who are working with us. It allows us to do all this, make better product, and the main goal, help athletes all across the United States and the world get a phenomenal experience from you guys, the coaches.
You mentioned winning the day too, where, something that I think you do really well is you structure the day around with these mini games that all of a sudden it culminates in winning the day, or, whether that's in a lot of time, competition with oneself or competition in context of others in the workout. And I think that's a good way to look at structuring and thinking about flow, where flow, you tend to dip in and out of it, right? It's rare that you get in it and you'll stay in it for an entire game. Great if that happens, but more than likely it's periods of that. I mean, I think of like, one example is when Klay Thompson had 60, points on 11 dribbles or something like that. Like he was crazy, clearly locked in the whole game, but then you'll see guys ring off 3-4 in a row and they can't miss, and then they'll dip out and maybe they'll come back. So just like that in a workout, or with yourself, thinking of structuring mini games and not as concerned about staying in that state or being in that state for that entire duration, but like Duncan and George, how quickly can you pop back into it? And I think focusing and returning to the process is a good way to ground and reset, especially if you start to notice frustration or pieces like that kick in. Another piece with flow, and this is my own personal observation and theory, is there seems to be a rhythm involved. Like if I were to add an element to the theory of flow, I guess I'd add two. One would be novelty. That when you're in a flow state, you're more likely to do something you've never done before. So there's a creative element, and you find yourself able to apply your skill set in novel ways. Whether that's due to the neuroplasticity going on, or just the general comfortability in yourself, in your capacity. And then similarly, rhythm. Another observation is that when players or people are in flow, there's a sense of they become aware or feel a sense of rhythm. I think as basketball players, if you reflect when, there's a sense of ease in movements and effortlessness, which is another quality of flow. So I think finding ways to induce rhythm and experience that felt sense of rhythm, whether that's, through ball handling, creating space in your dribbles, having whether it's a hesitation where you're kind of exaggerating that. We used a metronome as an opportunity to experiment with what that's like to play on beat, dribble on beat, and pull into, a jump shot in that way. That could be, I think there's something there in terms of a prerequisite and how does one increase the propensity to get into flow. And I really make that clear. Flow, there's no formula to get into flow. I do A, B, and C, and now I'm in flow. No, it's all about how do you create conditions to increase the probability that you experience flow? And I think the best players are able to do that. It's the probability that they go into flow on a day-to-day basis is higher than those that don't. And so thinking of it that way and looking at, what are your pregame rituals? What do you do on court prior to competition? What do you do on court prior to your workout? What are the similarities? How does your body feel when you feel like yourself, or you feel you have access to these skills? Noting all those elements and then seeking to produce those effects on a consistent basis.
Beautifully said. There are so many nuggets I want to pry at from what you just said, because I've got questions I think that would be super valuable. The first, I want to go back to that metronome drill you talked about. So for backstory, Jordan and I and Will Ferris, shout out to Will, another great mind in the basketball space. We've been running a camp out in Bainbridge Island for 2 years now, and we've had some really fun different drills or experiments where we've played around with different ways of training players on the court. And this past summer, we put a metronome on the speaker, and we were having players dribble and shoot to different beats per minute. So every few seconds, I would go in and change it. Maybe it was 60 beats per minute, and then we go to 90 beats per minute. And they're just constantly listening to the speaker and then having to adapt their rhythm to try and hit that rhythm. And what I thought was so fascinating was players were hitting shots at an incredible rate. They were very efficient, just knocking down shots. Now, this was like after we had brought the energy down. We did a little mental performance session. So this was kind of like a warm up back into the playing side of things. So that was an interesting observation. But on top of that, like, they reported that they weren't really aware of how many shots they were making. So that was more so an observation of the coaches. Like, these kids were shooting incredibly high percentages, but the players didn't even know. Like, they weren't even paying attention to that. And I just thought it was one of the coolest times where maybe things did click, and it felt like players were in flow, but also just the room was in flow. Everybody was kind of on that same rhythm. And maybe we can use this as an opportunity to shift more towards the group side of things, because you obviously have a lot of experience academically studying group flow. But prior to that, you've been a part of some incredible teams that have potentially outperformed expectations regularly. So Jordan mentioned he played at Lehigh. He was a part of the Lehigh team that beat Duke and went on a historic run in the March Madness tournament. And that's an example of a team that has done more than people maybe thought they could. So could you talk about your experience there? You were the captain of that team. Was CJ a captain as well, or he was on the team? So you and CJ McCollum, captains of that team, go on to beat Duke. What did you notice about that team? How did you guys, maybe you can look back, how did you guys experience group flow together? What were some of the standards that you had set as a team? And then let's just start to transition into how can trainers and players better impact group flow?
Yeah, that really, it was my experience at Lehigh that led me to want to study positive psychology, because of these states of group flow, because of what we were able to build and experience collectively that I found so fascinating and applicable to a variety of contexts, even outside of sport. I'll give you an example, maybe just to start with an example of what group flow looks like. Group flow, you think of flow being an optimal state of performance. It has all those same conditions. The addition is that it is experienced collectively, so that individuals are reporting these same effects, and that there is a sense of connectedness between individuals in that context. An example, we played, this is during my senior season when we beat Duke, we played Williams and Mary at their place, and we were similarly ranked in the hundreds or whatever we were at the time. And at the end of the first half, it was 40-7. We were up, which doesn't happen a lot in Division I basketball. And the experience on the court is we were so connected, especially defensively, where we all knew where one another was going to be before they were there. It was a very almost surreal experience in the sense of almost, extrasensory in certain ways of just really connected and knowing where people were going to be, moving as one unit on the court. And a defense is a great way to look at that. I think offensively, I think, 5 or 6 guys ended in double figures. So we're moving the ball, finding the open shot. I think if you want to look at group flow, like look at the Spurs highlights, like beautiful basketball, and you'll see it and you can almost feel it, right? Where, this is just incredible. Those extra passes. And so experiences like that, I was like, well, let's just bottle this up and keep doing that. Now there's some elements within group flow that are different than individual flow. Well, one of that is a common goal. So everyone has to be committed and united around some sort of common goal. The more buy-in there is, that is one of the core components. Similar to the common goal, there's collective ambition. So that is the desire or the commitment of the collective to achieving that goal. In our context, we had both. We had a very clear common goal, which at the beginning of the year was to win a game in the NCAA tournament. Everybody bought in, everybody believed. Collective ambition. We all truly thought we could do it and worked every day. Now, the collective ambition, that goes up and down. Right. On the individual level. It's great to have that preseason. Let's see how it is in January. Right. So that's where it's a role of leaders. It's a role of coaches to monitor that. And as people drift, I think of it as that there's that core circle of the goal, the ambition. And as people drift away inevitably, whether it's due to playing time, their performance, rifts, interpersonal rifts, the duty of captain leaders to bring people back and find ways to keep people as close to that nucleus as they can. Because the reality is you can get away, and there's examples of teams that aren't close to that, that they allow that drift. Those are the most talented teams. Teams that win, that don't have that, have superior talent, period. So unless you are far and away a more talented team or program than the rest of your competition, it would be worth relying and monitoring that. And so I think those are huge elements. The other piece is role clarity, which is something that is obviously challenging to instill. We were fortunate enough to have guys that were selfless in that sense. And this, I think, corresponds to an element of group flow, which is being, one of the terms is ego. It's not ego less, but it's more conscious of egoic involvement. So are you willing to, at times, put the team above your own performance? And that's something that we were able to do because one of the messages that we had that I really personally wanted to install is that, look, if we win, we all win. And I led that by example with, just buying into my role, that the idea is if we were successful, everyone who wants to do what they have individually will have opportunities. And it turned out like I didn't have good numbers by any means, but because we made such a big splash, I had opportunities to play. So in terms of what that looks like, talking, like some behaviors that relate to that, talking on defense is huge for me. I think it's a really easy way to build that sense of connection and to make defense fun. It's an important habit where you can get guys flying around and build in those habits that bring that sense of connection. I think and Mitch, like, you might have some ideas in different constraints offensively, but finding ways, I think 3-on-3, honestly, like FIBA 3-on-3 rules is a great way to build those habits due to the constraints within that game offensively and defensively, because you have to fly around a lot, to find ways to move the ball, penetrate and kick, extra passes, You have to play faster. There's, more space. There's more decisions that you're making on a regular basis. And it's a game that really requires teams to be connected. So those are two examples, like defensively and offensively, of which I think you can play around with building the capacity for group flow.
I think if we look at the NBA finals this past year, those are two teams that demonstrated group flow. There were clearly players with roles. OKC, they've got superstar SGA, but then they also have other players, Chet Holmgren, who starred in his role, right? Indiana, same way. Everyone was very clear in what they had to do. And then when things shifted as far as injuries or whatever, other people stepped up and fit their roles. And I think maybe social media amplifies this too much. Like, we don't have the full story, but it appeared that those guys really liked each other off the court on both sides. Mm-hmm. And I want to tie this back to a private trainer. And how could a private trainer who's working with individuals from certain teams, but they're obviously trying to help the individual in front of them, one, perform better, but also help their team be better. So how, as a coach, could you impact a player's ability to impact group flow? I think is an interesting concept. And then also from a business perspective of, like, if you are doing small group training, which is something we do a lot with Elevate Basketball, my business, what are some ways you could impact that? So you talked about some ideas or some constraints. Like, I actually think a simple thing of no phones, like you're not allowed to be on your phone or have your phone during the workout at any point. You have to say hello to every single person in the gym. Like, those are two things that are, again, they're off the court, but it requires this interconnectedness. Your attention is in the moment because you're not able to be on your phone or somewhere else. Those are two things that I think greatly improve the relationships of the players there. And then when they step on the court, if they face adversity, they're a little bit better at getting through it. And then if they have success, same thing, they are kind of excited for each other because there's a little bit more human interaction. And I think that's a piece of team sports right now that's a little bit lost with maybe the increased use of phones and social media. People are a little bit more siloed in their individual. They're focused on their individual as opposed to the team. So I'll get clear on a question for you, because I just rambled a bit because I have a lot of ideas now that you've been talking about this so eloquently. But your advice to a private trainer, so again, not working with a team, but working with individuals, how can they best impact the individuals to be high-level contributors to a team or to team flow?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, some of the examples that you brought up, I think, are great because, at the root of it is a sense of connectedness and your capacity to connect with others, and also your awareness of what's happening around you and being able to adapt to that environment. There's also sort of this underlying element. OKC is a great example of this playfulness that you see within the team dynamic. And I think that's a big part of the leadership and top down when you have a guy like SGA, when you have the MVP, who is being willing to create that kind of environment, to make the extra pass, to get guys involved. You can kind of have that environment. My sense from that team is that they are allowed to be themselves, that each guy on that team is allowed to express who they are without fear of ostracization or rejection. And because of that, there's a sense of safety. So another piece of group flow is psychological safety, which essentially is that you're able to fail without fear of repercussions or punishment. It's not to say that failure is tolerated or, that mistakes are over time are tolerated. There's an expectation those will be fixed, but it's like you can show up as who you are without the fear of being rejected, which is important. And so, in the context going to individuals and trainers and group, I love the idea of no phones, of encouraging interaction. There's like the high five study, right? Which shows that the teams that, there's some correlation to high number of high fives and I think winning percentage. There's another correlation between a colleague of mine did his dissertation on group flow and found that, and he looked at games within 5 points decided within 5 points in the fourth quarter with 4 minutes left. And he found that on average, the team that made more passes had a higher winning percentage than those that didn't. So these are just some anecdotal evidence to certain behaviors that could be related to this sense of group flow. For trainers, I think getting them comfortable in practicing speaking and using their voice, encourage from a perspective of encouragement, even self-talk, the voice and sound in general is a great way to connect, to collaborate. And then playfulness, one of the reasons why I really like CLA approach is because it's fun and it's engaging, and it can just be fun because it's fun. And so, having that be a part of the drills and encouraging players to engage that way. If you think of kind of teammates you want to have, every team wants a guy that is loose, that's going to have fun out there. It's going to remind people to have fun. It's going to encourage their teammates. So building in those behaviors, it seems like there's space for that. Now, obviously they take their role seriously, take their job seriously, but to add that levity into a team dynamic is something that is really valuable. And so encouraging playfulness by modeling it, is one way in which a trainer can do it, and reminding them that, they're here to develop their skills, and they're here to have fun doing that. So the more that you can create an environment of playfulness and connection between players, even if they're on different teams, through competition, mixing up the teams so that, you're able to build relationships between players, you're fostering these really like social skills that will take form cross context as players develop.
Yeah. I want to play devil's advocate now, because I agree with you. And I've seen the players that have been able to do that. But most of the time, the players that have been able to do that, like you said, the reason they can do it is because the coaches give them the psychological safety to do that. But the reality is, a lot of the times coaches don't. And so now, if we can shift advice maybe to a player, how would you give advice to a player who wants to improve their performance? They want to play with joy because they know it's good for them, it's good for their team, but that's not something that's positive or looked on positively from the coaches, the coaching staff. What are some sneaky ways maybe that they can put a little bit of joy into that process, or that practice process?
Yeah, this is so, like one common context I think is, as let's say a player is trying to expand their role within their team, that their coach, based on their own perspective or lens, has put them in a specific role. Maybe it's like, hey, you're a 3-and-D guy. We're not going to see. We don't want to see you put the ball on the floor. And you've been working on your game. You really want to be more dynamic and score, try to, be able to score at all 3 levels. You feel like you can, you've been working on it. So how do you carve out that role? Well, if you start by doing the things you can do really well. So I go back to communication. And if coaches see you interacting and saying the right things at the right time and using your voice to be active on the court, other than just physically, but using your voice to be active, they automatically see you being engaged. So they see engagement. And if they see engagement and you're reiterating, this is some sneaky, you're reiterating their terminology and their concepts. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, this guy gets it. He's engaged. He listens. So they're building trust because they see you as someone that can, that understands, that's speaking their language and kind of reiterating their message.
I want you to dig into that a little bit more. Why is that sneaky? And I think I know, but this is something we've talked about as well, like sharing terminology.
Yeah.
Why is that a good strategy? So maybe give an example too, and why is that effective?
Yeah. So, everyone wants to be heard and they want to be listened to. And so a coach, if you can reflect back their language, their terms, now all of a sudden on, a really human level, they feel heard, they feel listened to, and you are demonstrating, that your capacity to absorb and share, and you kind of align and be like, hey, I see you, coach. I hear you. We're on the same team. So the coach feels that, and as they feel that, they can they might, they'll start to trust you more. They can, and I think you can now start to look at carving out your role, and you start showing that you're part of, you're part of the whole, you're part of their vision for the team in whatever context that is. And so, it's again, it's a way that you can start to, I think the idea is a lot of times is, let me go in there and I'm going to take it, which you can. I've seen a lot of guys try to take it and they don't take it and they have a tough time. Right. So, if you think you can shoot threes and you're like, I'm going to shoot a three every time, which I think we hear a lot of stories of those, right? And success stories. I've seen a lot of unsuccessful attempts at that end in careers where players never got their opportunity to do what they felt they could do, because instead of trying to build trust, they took the route of, I'm gonna do it my way. So that's what I'm thinking. But I wonder if you have any other thoughts on the language piece, or how do you, kind of the sneaky ways to use the coach's scheme against them.
I mean, I think that's something that as a player I benefited from. I don't know if I was always conscious of it, but one thing that I can do is project my voice, and I'll know terminology, and just by repeating coach's language and repeating it loudly, and when it matters, the timing of it, I think that I benefited a lot from that, because the immediate label that a coach puts on that type of person is, oh, they're a high IQ person. And most of the time, your coach was probably praised for being a high IQ player themselves. So they kind of look at you in a positive light. And sometimes you can use this as sneaky ways, or people might think this is like unethical hoops, but like you're playing the game. Like if you want to get on the court, your coach needs to like you. And obviously you need to be good. That's like, if you're not good, you're probably not going to have any chance. But when it gets to these higher and higher levels, like the difference between you and your backup typically isn't too much. And those intangible things where your coach builds trust in you, especially when they're going to have to make decisions where they're at a heightened level of anxiety, or these are tense situations when they're deciding who to put in the game. You want to own that psychological real estate of being the trusted one, and the one that they will feel like will execute like they wish, or like they think they could. Because you hear so many times, like a player that makes a transition from player to coach, like that's a tough transition, because they still have that desire to be on the court and have the control in those situations, but coaches typically don't. So you gotta win those battles. But above all that, I think what's most important is, if you are doing those things, like you said, and you're communicating at a high level and you're projecting your voice and you're communicating at the right time, that means you're in tune with what's going on around you, and you're going to be playing better, and you're going to be more likely to fall into that state of flow. And ultimately, those are the things that are going to give you the results that will reinforce the reason why you're on the court.
Yeah. And thinking of a few examples of guys that by being on the court, they make their teams better. I mean, a lot of times you'll think of defensive guys, two-way guys that for some reason, when they're on the court, they're consistently making the right decisions. I mean, Draymond Green, we played against him my senior year, and I was impressed, and he never stopped talking. He never stopped talking on both ends of the court. He ran the team. He was a true general on both ends, and his numbers don't say it. His antics will set those aside. The reality is that, time and time again, he provides a stabilizing presence, and he is a great example of someone that knows how to get his team into flow.
Right.
He has a high awareness and IQ, and really it's IQ, but it's more EQ, FQ, flow Q, whatever you want to say, of like who's hot, who's warming up, who needs a touch. It's almost like you can kind of see in his mind, he has guys, he's just aware of who needs what when, in a way that is really, I think it's a highly underrated skill, and people can have tremendous careers by understanding how to do that.
Yeah, there's so many guys that pop up, like Kevin Garnett, another one. You look at the teams as far as their defensive connectedness when he's the anchor of that defense and communication is at a forefront. Even a guy like LeBron, he's got a very loud voice, and it's not that he's, talking too much, but he's very present. You hear him, he's calling everything out on offense, on defense, and people listen to that. And it's an important role every team needs to have. But at the same time, you talked about roles earlier. Like, there are times where you need to be the one listening and receiving information, and then what you do with that information is important. This will be my last question. We've gone over time here, but I think it's an important piece of the entire communication process. You look at a complete season, you're going to have those times of adversity. And I know from our personal conversations, like your team at Lehigh, that senior season, everyone remembers only the positive, but there were times where you guys were really tested. And how can we apply the concepts of positive psychology when we are in those situations that are not positive?
I'll use a specific example of that season and then bring it back to the individual. We hit a 3-game losing streak towards the end of the regular season going into the playoffs. And, that nucleus that was so strong in the beginning started to fray, and you could feel it. Guys that weren't playing, now all of a sudden they had a reason to be upset. If you're not playing and we're winning, that's one thing. But if you start losing, now all of a sudden you're validated. So could kind of feel that splintering occur. And what I decided to do was call all team only, players only meeting, and remind every guy 1 through 14 why they were valuable to the team, because everyone provides value. This is kind of a very tangible positive psychology, which I'm not necessarily aware of at the time, but it was my attempt to how do we bring people back. And in that context, it was reminding people of their value, and that value wasn't necessarily related to their skill set on the court. It was related to their effort on a day-to-day basis, despite knowing they're not going to play. It was related to, just being a funny person and offering some relief in the locker room. It was related to, just their positive encouragement on the bench and their creative celebrations. So being specific, direct, and in the acknowledgement of what is going right, that was applied from me to others. It could also be applied to oneself. So some elements of positive psychology, positive self-talk, really identifying things really might not be going your way, but what is, because there's always something that is. And that's where gratitude also comes in, is the fact that if you are fortunate enough to be in a position where you feel bad about how things are going on your basketball team, right? Your basketball season isn't going the way you wanted it to. There are things to be grateful for. That is a beautiful opportunity, because that's a short span and not in your life. And there's a lot of people that would really love to either have that back or have that period. And you have an opportunity to address it, because there's a younger you that chose to play this game because they loved it, because they saw someone on the screen or someone in your family that did it, and they want to enjoy that. And there's a kid inside that is just so stoked to be able to hoop day in, day out. And I would say if there's one thing I took away, it's really finding and connecting to that part of you that wants to play the game because they love the game, and being grateful for the opportunity to do so. It's amazing how the other issues or perceptions can dissolve and evaporate once you return to that place.
Certainly. Well, on the note of gratitude, I want to say how grateful I am for you coming on the podcast and sharing so much wisdom. I truly feel that if you have any role in the basketball space, and honestly, it expands past basketball, coach, player, trainer, somebody listening here would find a lot of value in something that was said. So really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Mitchell. Love what you do. And yeah, I'm grateful to be in your orbit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If people want to connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
Best way, I'm not on there all the time, but you can find me jordanhamilton.play on Instagram. Would be the best way. We'll start there. And yeah, this is what I love to do. I love being able to offer what I can to help people be more who they are.
I love it. And I would highly encourage any coaches or trainers out there, if you wanted to bring Jordan in to do some work with your team or your community of players, he is the best of the best. I've done it myself for camps and will continue to do it in the future. I think what he's able to do with a group of people and with the individuals in front of him is special. So highly encourage that as a final plug for you.
Thank you, Mitchell. Appreciate it.
All right. Till next time.